Welcome back. So, my plan for this evening is to try and implement the storage of our metrics so that the API can use that to expose a statistics endpoint. This did, however, get me thinking about the actual values we're storing. Now, a metric name should be a fairly bound set, so we shouldn't really include the toggle ID in the name of the metric, because this effectively gives us an infinite set of metric names. However, I do want to be able to query by a specific metric ID. A lot. Because that's how we're going to power things like alerting based on, this toggle has not been switched on in month type alert. So that got me thinking about how I should structure these. And then I came to realize that actually this structure is only specific to Statsd. None of the other writers care about that, which makes me think I've got the API for this wrong. What I want is either a string name here for something like, let's say toggle red, and then inside the implementation for the Statsd writer, this would say if the name of the metric is toggle red, then write out toggle dot toggle ID dot blah 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 whatever, and then each of the writers could do their own thing, rather than trying to hang all of the writers off this string and objects, or string and value substitutions. The other option I thought of was, instead of having a string here, I would have specific objects, like a new toggle red stat, which would take in a toggle ID, so in this case a response dot toggle ID, and in the case of this one, that's it. Now, because we're going to be writing a lot of these, we're not going to want a huge amount of classes flying about. So I think we could get away with using structs for these. That way, hopefully, they'll be small enough that they'll fit on the stack, and we shouldn't have to worry so much about generating lots of garbage for the garbage collector to play around with. So yeah, I think we'll do that to start with, and then implement storage, which should just be a case of serializing the stat that comes through, and then writing it to a JSON file, a file with, I don't know, one string of JSON per line, say. So instead of this, we're now proposing, I suspect I should have a marker interface on this. I don't necessarily want a base class, because I don't have any properties I want to force onto things. Just the type should be enough. But I want to be able to type the parameter. I don't want to say object stat. What I want to do is struct stat to force it to be a structure, but I can't do that. So we'll just go with object for now. My point was I could do this instead. I could have a public interface IStat. No members on it, it's just a marker. If you want to use something as a statistic, it has to have that interface put on it. But it doesn't really provide any value, so I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to do that for now. Until later when I decide something would provide value with a base class or interface, in which case I'll do that then. Delay decisions until we actually need them. So I don't need to do anything with that. I would quite like a compiler error for this, but a string can be cast to an object, so in fact, temporarily at least, that interface does have value. By doing this, now when I build, I'll get a compiler error because the string that's currently being passed in can't be passed into that. Right, so we have our composite statistics writer. That now needs updating. This is an IStat stat. And as this is the composite one, what you need to do here is just pass it straight through. And this is the logging one. In fact, I think this IStat class or interface might actually have a useful method on it. Stat. I think we will do this. We'll have plus stat.render. Because each statistic can know how to render itself into a nice string. We'll come back to that in a minute. Now, as this is the Statsd one, this will need a decent implementation. For the time being, we can get away with just calling render. And we shall do that. And effectively, this is just calling the toString of the object. Which, when we get rid of this interface in a second, we'll be able to replace with toString. Right, so now we actually need to create our first statistic so that we can make these tests build. So this is our getAllToggle statistics. Update toggle state. I think 3 separate statistics for this, because they've all got slightly different things in them. So let's do this. Public struct. What is this? Anonymous state change. I really should use the same language for everything. I'm calling it anonymous in some places and default in others. We'll fix that in a minute. Now, this is going to have a constructor which takes in the toggle ID and nullable state. No, not nullable in this case. Or is it? No, it's not nullable because by this point we've already checked if it's got a value. Now, I don't know what I want to do with that yet, so I'm not actually going to implement anything in it. But this does need the IStat interface on it. And you know what? I'm actually going to rename that. I'm going to rename it to toString. Yes. Right. Now we say, oops, click override string toString. Now we need something to put in there, which is where this comes in. We'll make it properties because we're going to be serializing this in the future. I mean, I technically shouldn't make them properties right now because I don't need it right now, but I know what I'm planning on doing in a minute, so do that. And we'll just say toggle ID. Let's put some quotes around that. Default state changed to state. Right. Now we have the same thing again for a user and a group. Now we should actually call this toggle state change. that's a constructor. Now this time we also need the user ID. toggle ID state for user ID. Change to. Now this is where we need. I suppose we can leave it like that. I was thinking about the need for that state to have the word unset. Do want that. But it's not a huge amount to do. Now this time states is actually nullable. Like that. Now, I don't really want to introduce a base class to these just so I can have that bit of deduplication. But I could do an extension method for it. That would work. Render. Don't want to do toString because I couldn't override it then. Yeah, render is suitably generic. And shall take that. And find our extensions in here. Oh, I had a generic extensions. I do have states extensions. We'll have public static states question mark. No, string. And it's called render. And it takes in a this states question mark date. And does that. State has value 8. I'm not going to too lower it. I don't need to. Yeah. Right, so that's that one done. Groups is basically the same as that, but with the word group instead of the word user. That's a group ID. What does the $sign do at the beginning of the string? That makes it, I can't remember the name of it. It allows me to do interpolation with variables like this directly. If I didn't have the $sign, those would be strings, so that wouldn't get the value of that variable into the string. The equivalent, if you don't want to use the $sign, would be that with the string format. So rather than using 0 and then the 0th parameter, the $sign lets you have named arguments instead. Groups, change for group ID, change to that. Yep, that'll do. So now we can go back up here. And for the anonymous one, we're going to say new default state change response.toggleID quest.anonymous. Yeah, I'm definitely going to need to rename these. value. Oh, and then I can delete that and that. Put that there. Right, and now for this one, new, and this is a user, so toggle user state change. And this one requires the response.toggle ID user e and user value. I don't need brackets on that. And here we do the same bit for groups. Hey Joe, how are you? Groups. And we'll just copy these and just change the word user to group. Especially seeing as I now have a keybind for being able to do multi-selection in Writer. Right, so now we've got typed statistics for that one. Now we've got this one, which is a toggle red. So again, public struct toggle red, which is an IStat. And this just needs the toggle ID. This project is called Crispin. It is a event-sourced RESTful feature toggling service. I'm writing it mostly for fun, although I'd kind of like to use it at work once it's stable enough. And it's event-sourced because I think event sourcing is great. That's pretty much it. Toggle ID. Is that kosher called toggle? Yes, rename everything. Thank you. What is event sourcing? Event sourcing, as a really simplistic overview, is a way of storing data so that rather than maintaining the current state of something, you retain all of the changes required to get to that state. So if I just create a nice big comment block here, if you had a bank account, which is the standard example people use, and a user set came into the bank and said, look, my account says I've got $10 in it, and the bank, and I know that I should have 20, and the bank says, no, the account has 10, but they don't have any history of anything, because they've only got the current balance. So instead, what you could do is have a bunch of events, and you'd say, account created, no changes, money deposited, $20. I don't know, bill paid. These are some terrible names, but hey. Bill paid $10. So at any given point in time, we can just run the history forward and find out what the total is. So it just creates a history. Yes, effectively, but the history is the state. So when we load an account, rather than just loading this, we just start from blank and say, apply the account created method, now apply money deposited, now apply bill paid. So we end up with the right total. How is the history state stored? So each one is an event. If we go down and look at this. So these are all the events that I have for my feature toggles. So a toggle created event has the creator, of who did it, the ID assigned, name, and a description. And currently I have no actual storage for this. All of this is just stored in memory at the moment, in a list. But in the future we're going to implement some storage. We'll probably use a text file will do to start with, and then we can think about using either Postgres or some other kind of database to actually store the states in. And effectively, to find any object, you just need its primary key, and you get all of the events and just replay them in order. So you end up with a guaranteed history trail of what happened. Because now if a person comes back and says, my bank account should have $20 in it. It's a hash map. Essentially, in the database, you kind of could get away with that. Not quite, but yeah. So if it was a hash map, it would be something like an ID as the key, and then the value would be a list of events. The order has to be maintained, because otherwise you might end up doing invalid things. Like, for instance, this order that I've got on screen at the moment, money deposited 20, bill paid 10, that's valid. But if you replayed them in this order, that's probably not a valid thing to do. Yeah, so because the doubly linked list, I probably wouldn't go that far, because I don't tend to keep the events in memory that often. Having said that, I have an in-memory store. Let's have a look. Storage, in-memory storage. So this horrible mess is my event storage, that line. So given a toggle ID, here are the list of events for it. In database terms, in a database table, you'd have a key, which would be your ID, and then a sequence column, so just an integer auto-incrementing for each event, and then a column full of JSON data. Don't need that. Where was I messing with things? Ah, that one, get toggles. That was red. There's probably a lot better explanations of event sourcing that I'm managing at the moment. It is a very popular thing at the moment in development circles. So yeah, there are a lot of good resources on doing these kind of things. Now, my getAll method could technically have the same statistic. We're doing a for each here. But I can now that I'm actually strong typing my statistic writing, we're going to have multiple toggle. What will this program do? The idea is you deploy it as a service on your network, and then other applications that want to check if a feature is enabled for a specific user group or for everyone would query this service. So let's say you have say you have some kind of online shop and you want to try out a new feature which makes a buy it now button twice the size as normal if the item is on offer. You wouldn't want to roll that out to everyone at once, so you'd put that change behind a feature toggle. And then when a user visits the site, you check if the toggle's enabled for that user, and if it is, they get a big button. If it isn't, they get a small button. Now you could then look at your statistics for how often people buy things, and say the group of people that had the big button bought things 20% more often than the people who had the small button. Now you know you've got a valid feature, and you've just done some A/B testing. So that's the kind of thing I'm aiming for this for. Another use is if you have multiple teams at work and you're releasing a service and you're relying on something that another team needs to implement, but for whatever other pressures they can't do it straight away, you can put your new feature behind a toggle and release it straight out to production and just leave it off until the other team is ready to release their software. We do this at work not often, but it is useful to be able to do when we do need it, because we'd rather have the software in production and not have it just not being used, because people then forget about what they've implemented and then things don't work as you hope. So it's better to release things while they're fresh in people's mind. Here we are going to do, I'm going to rename that. No. String.join. That's right, yep. Run it with a comma, toggles. Yeah, that'll do. And now instead of that, we now just do new multiple toggles read response.toggles. And we'll just get rid of that, put that in there. Is that actually a list of toggles? Yeah, I need their IDs. Select toggle ID. Lovely. Right, so hopefully this now all compiles. Oh, hell. Yes, well, I suppose I am testing things that don't work quite like that anymore. Right, so now we need to check if we received something that we expected. Well, that's easy enough. Received arg is. Now, we're after a default toggle Don't you give me no suggestions, I know that exists. Okay, not quite named as I remember, but hey. So we will match on with one of those. As the expected state. What's your problem? Expected. Ah. So I was originally testing with strings because I was rendering them. Now that I'm not rendering strings, it should be state. Yeah. Not sure if this test reads very well anymore, but we shall muddle through. States off. States null, I guess. Is there any point in specifying both? No, not really. I will do that and just delete things, as deleting code is fun. Missing a bracket. Right, did not receive arg.any toggle default state change. Yeah, that looks about right. Oh, no, we couldn't. Now this is checking for the word unset, which is what we were doing beforehand, but again, I'm no longer rendering strings when writing statistics. I'm just passing objects about and leaving it up to the writers to decide what to do. Do is this, and take that, and then this more fun, we'll say that's not a default state change anymore, that's toggle user change. T dot toggle ID is equal to specify toggle ID anywhere. Yeah. So underscore response dot toggle ID and T dot user ID equals user ID. And the state is what we. Yeah, that'll do. Same thing for the groups. Except that's a group ID. That will be in a second. That's a group as well. Don't need that. Don't need that. That. Did I delete the expected parameter of this one? Yes. Right. So I discovered I get marginally better compile times if I don't record the streams locally. So I stopped recording them locally. So I'm still considering what am I considering? I can't remember. Yeah, considering buying a capture card so that I can offload the HDMI capture to some other machine. Key equals substitute for IStat. Statistics behavior. And there isn't a statistics generator. Did not receive arg any IStat. Object actually. No, IStat. Now, created a generator, and my generator is writing something, so we'll have a public struct generated stat IStat. Doesn't actually need anything in it, I think. Does it? Oh, we are checking that both things hit things, so yeah, alright, we'll give it a key and a value. string key public string value get set. Right, so here we say new generated stat key equals key value value. Right, so now my assertions can read arg any generated stats. To be honest, I don't care what the value is in that one. This one, however, I want to make sure that I get two different instances. So in fact, instead of passing a string and a value in here, we'll just pass a stat in. That. And in fact, we'll make it an IStat. And then get rid of this. Perfect. So here we can just say substitute for IStat. And that should be an IStat. So we received a writing. When there wasn't one, we received nothing. Yep. And here, we want to make sure we received both of these. We'll have var stat1 equals a substitute for IStat. Var stat2 equals substitute for IStat. That in here. I'm sure there was a way of... Oh no, that was something else. Well, there was a way of specifying that we received exactly two statistics. That was return values I was thinking of. Right. How many more breakages have we got? Build succeeded. Let's run the test and see how broken they are. One failure. Let's see what that is. All the rest of these are running. Could not find a parameter constructor. Ah, yes, well you don't need one. You just need to be one of these. Did I not run these tests the other day when I refactored them back to how they should be? Clearly not. Well, everything else except for that one unrelated test passed. Nice. Let's commit that one first. Right, what file is that? Composite statistics writer tests. Git add source Crispin .tests infra statistics composite statistics writer. Now we don't want to commit everything in it, we just want to commit part of it, I think. No, actually, that's all we want to do. Oh, it is only part of it. I don't want to commit that line. Yeah, stat posit IStatisticsWriter tests. My goodness, that's a mouthful. Fixed test setup to fixes again. Right. Now that we've done that, let's diff this lot. Now we have some bad white space. States extensions. And where was the other one? In statistics behavior tests. And I'm sure I saw another one. I did. Update toggle state statistics. State statistics. Pretty sure I ran the. There we are. Right. Stats. Factor. To base. Let's do this. IStatisticsWriter. Use objects for metrics. Metric types. That'll do. Not the greatest commit message, but it'll do. Now, one of the things we wanted to do was the Statsd renderer. Now, this one at the moment is just calling toString, which is not what we want to do, because it's not going to generate the right kind of metric. Now, there are many ways we could implement this, but the most straightforward, for the time being, is a map. So we'll do a private, static, read-only. Static because we only want one copy of this for the entire application. This will be a dictionary of type and then func of object string. I think. Yeah, we'll see in a minute. I think that's right. Yeah, that'll do. I don't know what to call it. I'm going to call it mapper, despite the fact that is a terrible name. Let us move that up to the top of the class, because we're going to write a helper function to populate this, so that we can abuse some typing. We'll have a private void add map. Oh, I'm just going to call it add, stuff it. T, and then we'll be a func of T string. It's called map. And all this is going to do is do mapper add. Actually, we'll do this. Type of T equals metric. We then invoke map casting metric to T. Yeah. Right. Now that somewhat horrible method means that we can now write things like this. Not public, this is our static constructor, so this is only going to happen once. I might move these into a separate class in a minute. let's see, add. Now, our first statistic was toggle red. I'll call it M. So now we need to return a string, and because we now have a typed object, we can get everything. So I'm going to return toggle ID M toggle ID red. Oh, that needs to be static. There we go. Right. The one for multiple is going to be more interesting because I want to output many of these. M dot toggles dot plastic keyboard. I'm just going to implement a quick extension method. Extensions. Do I have a general one? Statistics extensions. What have we got in here? Yeah, that'll do. Not ideal though. Just have a. Do I not have a general extensions? Nope. Oh, I'm going to add one. Extensions. Public static class. Public static void each t I enumerable t action t action. Oh, I should probably give that a name. Self. And all this is going to do is for each self item. Good name, good name. Action item. Because it annoys me that that doesn't exist by default. Right, so now we can do. Oh, hang on, I forgot the word this off the front, didn't I? Where'd that? Stop jumping about. This. There we go. Now it's an extension method. Much better. You know what? I could make it not a func. I could make it an action. That makes things a bit easier, I think. Let's do this. It's an action. T doesn't return anything. Oh, I suppose. Ah! What the hell is going on with my... Or possibly my fingers. It is Friday night, I am quite tired. Right, so instead of doing that, we now do this. And now we do is when we get a statistic, we say var handler here, var handler equals. Do we? No, it's an action of object handler. If mapper.try get value type of stat, no, stats.get type out handler then wait task run, and instead of that the handler that. Yes, inline the out declaration. So essentially each statistic just needs a line in here. Yeah, doesn't work very well for injection, but I might inject that later. Depends if I decide to change Statsd library or not, and I'm not sure if I'm going to yet. I do like the look of the other one because it does have an interface, so I can mock it and check this works. As it stands, because this is using a static object, I can't assert that I received the right value being called on here. So I might change that later. We use this if here as well, so that if there isn't one of these lines, like for say my toggle updated, once it won't blow up, it'll only run this. It can, but while I remember it, I'm going to add those. So add toggle default state change, and what else do we have? Toggle user state change, toggle group state change. But these should also be past tense as well. Oh, we'll fix that in a minute. So effectively all we need to do here is take that. Yeah. Except it's not one of those anymore. Toggle state default. And then m.state.render. Actually, this one doesn't need rendering. It's not nullable. Same kind of thing goes for the user and the group. User m.userid groups dot m.groupid should be users m.state, and these ones do need the render call because they could be the word unset as well, and I want that specifically there. Right, that'll do for that. Let's see, Statsd StatisticsWriter. Implement metric name rendering. Right, and now I did mention I was going to actually try and write something that would store these somewhere. In memory or to disk is the question. Let's do in memory, because I have no idea what I'm actually going to write yet, and there doesn't seem much point writing this to disk if I'm going to just delete them all on a regular basis anyway. Now, do I have my internal one? I've got my statistics one. To logging statistics and over to composite. I'm sure I had an internal one already. Internal. Nope, clearly not. Right, let's implement one. Internal. IStatisticsWriter. So this implements IStatisticsWriter. Now we also need to do something with our statistics, but it actually doesn't need to be a lot. In fact, I think we can get away with just chucking it straight to some kind of storage solution which doesn't really do any storing. Yeah, so if we say we have a public interface IStatisticsStore, public, void store istat. Hardly seems any point to this interface at the moment. Oh, there is a point actually. Timestamping. Timestamp. Right, so now that we've got a timestamp on things, in our constructor, take in an IStatisticsStore. I'm not sure if I'm going to bother having a session object for this one. The point of this is to be in memory at least, so store.store. Let's not call it store.store, let's call it append. That. Yep. And we also need a timestamp. Now, I don't like passing now around because it makes that very difficult to test. And what if I decide that I don't want now, I want actually to use UTC now? So what instead I shall do is take in a func of date time, get time stamp. Now that can actually have any implementation now. Instead of that, we'll do this, get timestamp, execute that. Should probably actually store this to a variable in the class. Yeah, and return task completed. Yep. Now this interface doesn't want to live here. Now we've got infrastructure for statistics and we've got infrastructure for storage. Does the statistics have storage, or does the storage have something for statistics? And in which case, should I add them to this? I don't think so, because I could end up with totally different storage for this. Like completely isolated implementations. So I don't think I'm going to add them to this. So let's put that back. I don't know where I'm going to put that yet, but I'm going to implement the class for it. Do it like this. Create derive type. Public. Implement missing members. Now our statistics storage for in-memory is going to be super stupid to start with. Stats equals new list IStat. Haven't decided what I'm going to do with them yet. Probably project them as they come in somehow. So all we're going to do is just add them to that list. But we do want the timestamps. Maybe I should have a base class for them, and I could have timestamp on that. Or I could wrap them. Yeah, this is a my in-memory one, so I'm going to wrap them. So to do that, we'll have a private. Can you create generic structs? Stat wrapper. Yeah, nice. Not that I need it to be generic, because I've already got it typed as IStat. So a stat wrapper takes in a date, time stamp, and a statistic. Get only auto property. Get only auto property. Not sure what I'm going to do with these yet. So instead of storing a list of statistics or IStats, we're going to store a list of stat wrappers. That will do a new stat wrapper timestamp stat. I am increasing my object count by doing this, but I haven't decided quite what I'm going to do with this in-memory implementation yet. It might be a case that we'll take the values and write them to various things and then just return and never actually store these. But until I work out what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave this in memory. We're going to call this in memory as well. In memo. That's the constructor. Now that we've done all of that, to wire it up to the container, I'm beginning to think I might take a reference to structure map in the domain project, despite the fact it's only used up here. What we'll do is then have, rather than this registry being at the root, we'll have separate registries for each thing, because I prefer that to having one gigantic registry. Yeah, for the time being, we'll just do this. We have a statistics store, so for IStatistics store dot use shouldn't need to specify. Oh no, I do actually need to specify because it won't match the convention. Use. So structure map has a convention that says if you try and resolve this interface, find a class that has the name of the interface but without the I and implements that interface. But my storage is actually called in-memory store, so it won't match. So I have to manually specify it. And we're going to use singleton because I only want one of these knocking about, which is effectively what we're doing here, but I'm doing some custom building for my storage there. And we also better register our func as well. So we'll say for. Now structure map again can automatically build func of things to resolve to other things. So if you did a func of iStorage, it would return whatever you registered for storage wrapped in a function. But in my case, what I want is a fairly specific thing, which is going to be this: use x. Can I just do that? Date time dot utc now. Because do this as well. What a pleasant reading line. Right, now let's rerun the tests, because I have tests that verify that the container works. And then at some point I need to sit down and work out what statistics I actually want to write and query so that I know what to put in my UI when I come to build it. Because that's really going to drive what statistics I'm going to expose on the API. No point exposing things I don't care about to start with. And then if people want other things, we can add them, of course, but... Right, so I've broken the container. Error while building type statistics, Statsd IStatisticsWriter. Oh, blasted mouse. See the inner exception for details. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. I don't find that too unbelievable. Because I know what I've done wrong. Mapper equals new. Should probably initialize my dictionary before using it. Whoops. It's my last commit. Oh, I can just add it in. So I can be naughty and add that to my previous commit as if it had always been there. So that's what I've added. Git commit end. Enter the lovely world of Vim. Write the message, and voila, as if it had never been like that. So let's rerun these specific tests which failed. Hopefully they will pass. Oh, getting there. Ah, yes. Well, of course that one's now failing. So we've now got a new kind of writer. Internal statistics writer. Alright, now rerun those. Take a screen. Because this is beginning to annoy me. Right, and the root tests are probably broken due to the container as well. So rerunning that one should pass as well. So all those are running. Let's add this and have a look at what we've done. Added bad white space apparently. Not to that file. Internal statistics writer. Right, now that those pass, yeah, let's split those into separate files as they should be. Let's add these. Oh, no new lines at the end of files. git commit implement basic in memory storage of metrics. Now, I could go and implement my file-based storage, so persistent storage for events, or I can fix that anonymous issue. Because I'm calling it anonymous sometimes and default for otherwise. I'm not quite sure which one I want to use. You have the default state of a toggle, it's on or off, but you have an anonymous user. Let's go have a look at my handlers. Update state. Yeah, that should be default, I think. Question is, what does the API expose? Calls it default as well. That settles it. It's definitely being called default. And I don't need to do anything else there. Should have used rename symbol really, but oh well. In fact, I will use rename symbol. Rest. Just undo that. Now we can do our default, and that will actually rename everything for me. Right, and that all works. Toggle state rename property from anonymous to default. I'm going to stop here for this evening, I think. I'm going to write the storage tomorrow, the persistent storage, because testing a UI and having to constantly regenerate the data for it is a bit annoying. So once I've got persistent storage in place, I'll be able to start cobbling together a UI, which will involve a lot more swearing than normal. Yeah, hopefully I'll be able to implement the whole of the storage in one session tomorrow, because I think that's going to take more than half an hour. So yeah, we'll see. As always, everything is pushed up to GitHub, so it's github.com/ponderdom/Crispin. And if you've got any questions, send me a message on Twitter. I'm at Ponderdom on there as well. Yeah, thanks for watching, and see you next time.